Hello and welcome to the show. For the next half an hour, we'll discuss the most important economic stories of the week. We try and help you understand economic policies a little better, as well as apprising you of the important stories of the week. Whether you're an investor, a consumer, an entrepreneur, or just someone who wants to understand economic policy a little better. This is the show to watch. You're watching Policy Watch. I'm Athar Khan. Our focus this week will be Air India and the recently approved debt restructuring plan that might just give the cash-strapped carrier a new lease of life. We'll also discuss a story that directly affects you, the consumer. The oil minister's proposal to levy additional taxes on diesel cars has gone to Pranab Mukherjee, but the question still is, will he or won't he? And finally, we will get a sense of how the partial easing of curbs in the forex markets by the RBI has affected market sentiment. And to help us deconstruct these issues, I welcome back to the program the Deputy Executive Editor of the Hindustan Times, Rajesh Mahapatra. Welcome back to the show, Rajesh. Now, I'd like to go straight into our top story and discuss Air India. The struggling state carrier Air India got a new lease of life as the Group of Ministers, or GOM, approved a new debt restructuring plan on Tuesday. By clearing a 21,000 crore plan, the government is expected to take over the current liability of 23,000 crore incurred by the airline on account of the 80 new aircraft that have been inducted into the fleet. The Policy Watch team filed this report. Take a look.
It might be time for the Maharaja to smile again. The beleaguered airline has finally got the approval for a restructuring plan that is expected to revive its fortunes. The proposal will now go to the cabinet and, if approved, will let the airline steer clear of the financial mess it currently finds itself in. Air India needs 6,750 crore immediately to clear pending dues, out of which 1,200 crore has already been paid last year. If the cabinet approves the proposal, Air India can look forward to an upfront infusion of 5,550 crore through non-convertible debentures and guaranteed government bonds. Once this comes through, the state carrier is looking at equity infusion of 2,000 to 3,000 crore over the next 10 years. Air India's woes have been mounting, with vendors as well as suppliers routinely disrupting work through strikes and often resorting to blocking supplies to stake their claim. Air India has loans worth 44,000 crore to pay off. The airline's outstanding vendor dues amount to 3,000 crores. And with the cumulative losses of 20,000 crore, the airline has told banks that without immediate financial restructuring, it will not be able to service any loans beyond the 31st of Jan this year. The cabinet will also take a decision on whether Air India can go ahead with the purchase 27 Boeing Dreamliners it has already ordered. To avoid an additional debt burden, the airline will have to induct 3 planes on a scale and lease-back model. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, Rajesh, Air India obviously in a mess. The government needs to bail it out. This has been in the pipeline since last year, even beyond that. Now, what I want to ask you is what happens to the lenders of Air India? If my figures are correct, this debt restructuring will impose a burden of 2,000 crore on the consortium of 14 lenders. That also includes SBI, the country's largest lender. Now, there will be a hit of 2,000 crore on the bottom lines of 14 banks because of this debt restructuring. That's bad news for banks, isn't it?
It is. I think the bad news even came before that. I'm not very closely tracking, but if I remember, report said that by 31st January, if you don't service your loans, that's the 31st January was the 90th day, and then banks will have to classify them as a non-performing asset. Yeah. We have been talking about how the NPAs are rising and how some of the infrastructure sectors are where the risks lie, and aviation is one. And when we say aviation, apart from the other airline that we have heard about, the other big chunk is Air India. So that definitely has been a concern, and it has also been affecting these banks' performance, both in terms of what they could do moving forward, and also the way some of those banks which are listed on the stock market, how their shares have performed. Over and above this, if what has been proposed now, and if it gets the final go-ahead, and banks are, I would not hesitate to use the term arm-twisted to do this, it definitely places a burden that is not at all, that would not at all be welcome at this point in time.
Absolutely. I read somewhere that the banks, they didn't, obviously an anonymous official from a bank said, because it's the state carrier, because it's a government-run airline, we're really helpless and we can't really do anything till the government makes it clear. So that's a little unfair to these banks, don't you think so?
Yeah, it has been unfair as much to the banks as it is unfair to taxpayers like you and me, because there is this talk about equity infusion over 3,000 crores. Let me sort of take you back. I am really perplexed. Every time if you just do a simple internet search to look at, just do bailout Air India, and you'll go back in several years, and there'll be all kinds of figures. 1,600 crore, 1,400 crore. It started probably somewhere around 1,100, 1,200 crore, then goes up 2,200 crore, 3,000 crore. Then came the talk about 16,000 crore, then 26,000 crore, now back to 21,000 crore. You get scared as a taxpayer at the end of it, whether it's bonds or whatever the way. The idea is this is the kind of money that you are spending in whichever way you do it, whatever book entries you do on an airline that one is not convinced has any future.
Absolutely. So you're saying the shifting of the goalposts is obviously not fair to the banks, also to us, the taxpayer.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. They're shifting the goalposts over the last couple of years and even beyond that.
Absolutely. And what is worse is if we talk about why Air India has got into this mess, and when people talk about, what has happened, people talk about Air India went for certain fleet renewal. There is this talk about how the merger of Indian with Air India was ill-planned, not well thought out. It was not evaluated properly. Probably that was also. Then there is the third aspect which people talk about as to bilaterals, the routes that were auctioned, and how certain foreign airlines could have been favored, or how the interest of Air India could have been overlooked. My point is, it's a service industry. In service industry, people make or break a particular business.
Absolutely.
Anyone who travels, flies Air India, which I have had to do at certain times, because there are certain places, not that you would like to fly, being very honest, you would like to fly Indian or Air India, but sometimes you do have to, because there are certain places where you don't have any other airline. Looking at the staff, looking at the way the airport ground management takes place, the way you are booked into it, I don't get a sense that this is a business where the people who make this business are very clear as to what they should be doing to make their business going.
Right. So what you're saying, am I correct in gauging your response as saying that this is actually a management problem, or do you think it's a spillover of the fact that the airline is in financial woe? Do you think it's a management problem, or do you think it's a spillover of the cash crunch?
It's both. And the bigger question is, who manages Air India? Now, when people say management, who do you mean as management? Is it the aviation ministry? Is it the party in power? Is it, are there some lobbies at work? Are these the so-called, the chairman of the company, the board of the company? Or is it also the pilots union? Do employees have a stake in it? I think, we run the risk. The moment we talk in terms of pose the question, is it an employee issue? Is it a financial issue? Is it a management issue? I think the malaise is much deeper, and it cuts across every segment of this business.
Right. Lots of work needed on Air India, of course. Just a bailout will not help them. Obviously, next question I would like to ask you is, the RBI has now said that this debt restructuring has to be completed before March 20th. Now, unless Air India manages to do that, banks can label it as an NPA, non-performing assets.
Absolutely.
Do you think Air India can meet that 20 March deadline? Is that possible?
Well, much depends on what the government thinks about it. You have a minister, and there has been tremendous amount of inconsistency in the way. If I may recall, I think even the current aviation minister, one of his first statements was, no question of bailout. 2 weeks later, you say a note is going up to cabinet for discussion on bailout. So I don't think we have any clarity. I mean, one doesn't get a sense that the government is also very clear on what it wants to do. So yes, if the government now has decided for a bailout, they would probably find a way to do it.
Right, right. Also, one more thing that just came in the news, I think just a day ago, I think an international agency reported it first, is that Air India is asking Boeing for a compensation that goes up to $1 billion US.
Yes,
So
because of the delayed deliveries.
Yeah.
And if that money comes in, notionally it will make a bit of difference because, you know, they would make your account books look a little
That's
better
what I was
than...
going to ask you. Along with the bailout, along with the debenture, non-convertible debentures and bonds that the government is helping out with, will this $1 billion, first of all, will Boeing pay on time is my question.
Very
and if
difficult.
They do, and if they do, how effective will it be to actually shore up their finances?
I'm not very sure, you know, the way it is projected that this is the money that will just come into our kitty. I don't think companies like Boeing work that way. Yes, there are delays and they would compensate because these are international companies which follow certain procedures. But how would that money come in? We have no clear idea.
Right.
Nor is it that, you know, I have not read news reports which say how it's going to come in.
Boeing has refused to comment on it, by the way.
That is enough. I mean, that should let you think that, you know, it's not a very clear-cut case.
Right.
So that's the catch. There the catch lies. Even if they do, even if the money comes in, and your question is, with the bailout, and in the best of scenarios, let us hope we get that $1 billion.
Right, right.
So what happens? What does it mean to Air India? Well, it won't turn back into the pink of health. Maybe another 3 months, 6 months, it will go off the headlines.
Right, right.
So you and I may be relieved of reading about another bailout
That's
being
right,
demanded,
that's
but longer term, I don't think
that's a
these are-
stark outlook, if I can call it that. But let's hope for the best anyway. Now, next question, still on Air India, obviously, is the government has recommended issuance of bonds worth sovereign guarantee worth 7,400 crores. Now, the bond is likely to carry a coupon rate of 8.5 to 9%. Now, Air India has already started talking to LIC and other mutual fund organizations to subscribe to these bonds. Do you think that these financial institutions will have a positive response to vis-a-vis subscribing to these sovereign guarantees? Or do you think if the response is tepid, what does Air India do then?
it's unlikely to be tepid because 8.5 to 9% is a good rate. It carries a sovereign guarantee. So that's what if you are investing in a 10-year paper, you would make. So I think people will buy into it, and I mean, LIC would probably pick up the major chunk of it.
Right.
So I don't think that should have much of a problem.
Right.
But the question is, who pays for those coupon rates?
Right.
Again,
Right.
it goes out of the government kitty and the taxpayers' kitty.
Right.
I need to come back to it again and again because I think this question needs to be put there upfront as to who is paying for it and why should people pay for it.
Right.
If the question is national flag carrier and therefore, there is a national interest that is being served, I beg to disagree.
Right. Fair point. We'll take a break right now. We'll come back to the other story on the other side of the break. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to discuss in Policy Watch this week. We'll be right back after a short while. Welcome back. You're still with Policy Watch. Now, if Oil Minister Jayapal Reddy has his way, buying diesel cars might cost you a pretty penny in the next fiscal year. The Oil Minister recently forwarded a proposal to Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee to slap an additional excise duty of 80,000 on diesel vehicles in the union budget, a move that is bound to be opposed by the automotive industry as well as the Department of Heavy Industries. The idea of an additional excise levy has been tossing around in the oil ministry since 2008-2009 as a way of raising funds to at least partially meet the centre's burden on subsidizing diesel. Given the poor shape of the government's finances, the additional tax may make it to the budget this year, opposition from the industry notwithstanding. But the tax is more likely to be graded according to a vehicle's engine capacity or weight, with imported diesel SUVs attracting the highest slab. Now, Rajesh, this is just a proposal right now. It hasn't been obviously implemented. Pranab Mukherjee will study it. Do you think there's any merit in Jaipal Reddy's demand for an additional levy on diesel vehicles?
These are what we call in our language kite flying before the budget. So many times you don't know whether these are sort of floated to test the waters. And I would take it at that.
Right.
That this is something which, whether it's oil ministry or finance ministry, it's being sort of been let out to test the waters. And clearly you would have already seen some noises being made by the automotive industry.
Right.
Already auto sales are falling.
Right.
And this is what could happen. In my view, it's a knee-jerk reaction. And I don't think this is a reaction that fits well with your larger objective to move toward a progressive taxation system.
You mentioned the automotive industry's reaction to it, and recently some industry magnates, if I could call them, captains of the automotive industry came out and said it would be a retrograde step. Now, do you think that's fair, or do you think that's the reaction you would expect from automotive majors like, say, Tata's or Mahindra and Mahindra?
That's the reaction you would obviously expect from the automakers because they are going to be affected. But that's also a reaction with which I would tend to agree in calling it, as I said. This is not something which fits with the desire to move toward a progressive taxation where you sort of go on adding layers and layers of tax rates. And one is not very clear, when you talk about 80,000, because, the number, the way it has been put, 80,000, we are not very sure, whether it was, what nature it will take. Will it be a cess? Because this is clearly not a tax rate. So will it be a cess? Will it be some kind of an ad valorem duty? And if that is the case, what is the objective? The objective when it becomes a cess, and typically with most of these kind of things, the center gets to keep the money.
Right.
It is not shared with the states. Now, if you are levying, what is the purpose? If you come up front and say that, look, I don't have money, so I need to raise money, so whatever I can do, I will do that. So that's fair enough, but the government never does that. I'm not very clear on what is the rationale that the oil ministry has behind proposing this. If the idea is to cut back on pollution, or if the idea is that there are people, rich people driving Mercedes and BMWs run on diesel, why should they get a cheaper fuel? I think that doesn't cut much ice, because I think the share of diesel vehicles that are consumed, high-end diesel vehicles used meant for personal use, I think that share is a very small fraction of the total diesel
It's
vehicles.
interesting you mentioned pollution and emission levels. We'll talk about that in a moment, but before that, let's talk about the holy grail of the oil ministry, the Kirit Parekh report. Now, the Kirit Parekh report had said in its first version that 15%, if I'm not wrong, of diesel fuel is used for personal diesel vehicles. Now, the Kirit Parekh report has corrected that figure. Kirit Parekh himself said that initial tax would not be the right way to go about it. Unfortunately, and this is the automotive industry's view also, they're saying that people who want an additional tax, an additional levy, are still quoting from that Kirit Parekh report, even when Kirit Parekh has said that the tax would not be justified. Do you think that's a...
Yeah, that's a classic case of many times we keep hearing about various government expert committees making certain proposals based on some work which may have been outdated or not very relevant, and that doesn't come as a surprise. As I said, I don't think that it is such a high percentage, and when you talk about diesel vehicles attracting additional duty, you have to be mindful about the context in which you are talking. We are in a slowdown mode. Diesel vehicles are the ones who transport goods. There is a lot more cascading effect when you increase taxation on diesel than when you do it with petrol. Or even for that matter LPG, although LPG, politically
because
it is...
diesel and trucks and applying of price directly related to inflation as well.
Absolutely,
so.
Absolutely. And if at all you are raising this money, what are you raising this money for? Where are you going to go and put this? One would want to know. Are you sort of going to expand metro networks in cities.
Playing devil's advocate here, to reply to your question, there are people who say that this could be used to produce cleaner diesel, which obviously affects the environment as well. Now, do you like Brazil has banned diesel cars as its taxes diesel, like low diesel tax. In Denmark, if I'm not wrong, diesel cars are taxed higher to offset the lower price of the fuel. China, the taxes do not differentiate between diesel and petrol. Do you think it's time for India to do the same and like bite the bullet, so to say, and you know, ask for cleaner diesel?
There is clearly some room to look at some of this rationalization. I mean, one doesn't deny that. I would say, you know, I take your point on environmental pollution, and definitely one is concerned about it. My question is, does it really act as a disincentive for the number of diesel vehicles to come down, or for diesel consumption to come down? I mean, when you raise that issue, I would like to see evidence that shows that with rise in diesel prices, diesel consumption has gone down.
Right.
Unless you have that evidence, I would not like to raise the environmental pollution issue.
Right.
Yes, there is definitely a case to go toward cleaner diesel. For that, I don't think you need to levy more tax first to do that. First do that, and then you know, you price it higher.
Are you saying, in fact, very briefly, if you could, we have to go into another break, that the government, it's time for the government to ask the automotive industry to, you know, improve emission levels rather than tax their cars directly?
Absolutely. I would say, why don't you do it on fuel rather than vehicles that use that fuel?
That's a fair
I mean,
point.
fuel pricing have to be, there is a case for making fuel prices a bit prohibitive in the Indian context.
Right.
But it's not, it has to be a carrot and stick policy. On one hand, you tend to make it prohibitive, but on the other hand, you focus on building public transportation.
Right.
So that, you know, there is a disincentive for people to use their personal cars, but there is also an incentive for them to switch over. We have seen that in Delhi.
Right, fair point, Rajesh. We'll go into another break and discuss the third story after the break. Don't go anywhere. Another story coming up after the break. We're still in conversation with Rajesh Mahapatra. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still with Policy Watch. Now, even as the foreign exchange market struggles to get out of the woods and the rupee's vulnerability is still a concern, if Indian companies fail to roll over dollar borrowings, the RBI has given some breathing space to select public sector and private banks. In a move that gives some headroom to banks, the Reserve Bank has partially lifted the curbs on banks' forex transaction. Our bureau filed this report. Take a look.
India's banking sector, which was finding it difficult to meet client demands, has been given a reprieve. The Reserve Bank of India had imposed these curbs when the currency had come under attack from speculators. Several banks, including HDFC, ICICI, Axis Bank, as well as the country's largest lender, SBI, has been allowed to run higher net overnight positions or NOPs in foreign exchange. Banks use the open position limit to usually carry out proprietary trades or to sell and buy dollars to meet the client's demand. The banking sector, while appreciating the move, will be far from satisfied as the NOP caps are way below the earlier limits that banks enjoyed before the restrictions. The overnight limits before the curbs ranged from 50 crore to 500 crores. After the central bank stepped in, a uniform limit of 50 crores was imposed on all banks. The rupee had fallen to its 10-year worst slide of 18.7% between August and December 2011, but since the start of the new year, it has bounced back, rising to 8.64% since January 2nd. Bankers have welcomed the move cautiously, and analysts believe that the Reserve Bank might take a gradual approach in lifting all restrictions. Currently, corporates and FIIs are still banned from betting on the dollar by buying it forward, selling it back, and rebuying it. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Rajesh, do you think after the RBI intervened just at the end of last year, you think the rupee has obviously slightly improved, but do you think the RBI intervention worked and the rupee will continue to improve?
I think there's been not slight improvement. I think there has been a significant improvement in the way the rupee had gone down, and it has recovered quite a bit of ground. Clearly, yes, the central banks, you're right, in the sense the central banks' moves have definitely helped. And I also think that there has been certain other larger economic positives that have come out in terms of both the global economy, the job loss data in the United States that has sort of encouraged people, investors to look a little more at emerging economies, markets. And that has sort of brought back a lot of FII's investment into the stock market. And all of that has helped rupee recover substantive.
Right. If I would put you on the spot and see, like, where do you see the rupee going from here on end? Say the next fiscal, do you see the rupee improving, or do you think you can't say much because it's still a volatile market?
We may not see the kind of volatility we saw in the last quarter. I would hope that it would be a relatively more stable regime. There were speculations and projections at the beginning of the year that rupee may average around 55 and it could volatile. People are scaling back those projections now. Now a lot of analysts are putting it at 52. I would hope, and there is reason to believe that you may see the forex environment a bit more stable than what you had in the last quarter.
Right.
I don't think that kind of volatility,
Right.
Unless the global economic environment and particularly the US market
Deteriorates.
In a big way.
Right. Fair point, Rajesh. Thank you so much. We'll have to end the program right there. As Rajesh said during the course of the program, Air India, the bailout, will have to wait and watch where that is going. Even the money coming in from Boeing might not be able to help them if the response from those financial institutions that they're talking to is tepid. We'll have to wait and see what kind of response Air India gets. Also, diesel cars, we talk about that. I know my plans of buying a diesel car are on hold till at least post-budget, till we know what's happening there. Thank you so much for being with us. Next week, we'll be back with another special guest on Policy Watch. Till that time, thank you for watching, and goodbye.